The master watch. A silver watch lies in rubble. A boy in a red hoodie reaches down. Behind the polished surface, an old man's silhouette waves goodbye before dissolving into nothing. 13 hours earlier. The crowbar's teeth bit into rotted oak. Henry Vane's weathered hand, grease under every fingernail, the kind that never quite washed clean, gripped the metal shaft and pulled. Dust motes pirouetted in the dying orange light that slanted through the tower's belfry windows. The wood screeched, a long, protesting cry that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than just timber. The St. Jude's clock tower had been scheduled for demolition at 5 p.m. It was 4:45 now. Henry could hear the machinery outside, the deep, rhythmic thumping of the diesel engines warming up. The wrecker crane's operator was probably stretching, checking his phone, preparing to reduce 140 years of architecture to a pile of rubble in less than an hour. Henry didn't care about preservation or history. He was here for salvage. The tower's guts had been picked clean months ago. The copper wiring, the iron pipes, the brass fixtures, all of it had market value. But something in the building records he'd found had made him curious. A notation from 1887. Compartment sealed. Contents unknown. The kind of note that made salvage men's eyes gleam. He pried another floorboard. The board lifted. Henry reached into the dark cavity, his fingers extended, searching. The air inside was cold, stale. He brushed against something metallic, wrapped in cloth, oilcloth, yellow with age, stained with something that might have been blood or might have been time itself. He pulled it out carefully. The cloth unraveled like shed skin. The silver pocket watch that emerged was smaller than he expected, impossibly heavy. Its cover was engraved with patterns, stars or pipes, or maybe both at once. The designs seemed to shift depending on the angle of the failing light. No maker's mark, no inscription. Just the dense, intricate engravings, and the sense that this object did not belong in the natural world. Henry pressed the release button. The watch face swung open, but there was no face, no numerals, no hands. Instead, beneath a glass dome no thicker than a human hair, tiny gears rotated. They glowed, a soft, pulsing green that reminded Henry of deep-sea creatures in National Geographic documentaries. The gears moved with impossible precision, meshing and rotating according to mathematics that didn't exist yet, or didn't exist anymore. As Henry tilted his hand, the gears cast a projection onto his palm. A map, a holographic map of the town's street grid rendered in green light. Main Street floating above his skin like a thing with its own gravity. The watch vibrated, soft at first, then harder. Henry's hand began to tremble. A massive shadow eclipsed the window. Henry looked up just as the wrecking ball swung into frame, silhouetted against the dimming sky. For a moment it seemed to hang there, suspended, a metaphor in steel. Then it fell. Henry shoved the watch into his heavy canvas jacket pocket, the one with the torn seam, the one that had held countless bolts and screws over the years, and lunged for his toolkit. The floor beneath him bucked, not immediately, but close enough. The thud of impact reverberated through the tower's skeleton like a struck tuning fork. He clattered down the rickety wooden stairs, his boots raising clouds of old dust, 2 steps at a time. The stairwell was narrow. The walls pressed close. Plaster exploded on the landing above him, a small white avalanche that tasted like old buildings and the color gray. The ceiling above began to cave. Henry hit the ground floor and threw himself toward the back exit. The toolkit handle bit into his palm as he ran. Behind him, brick and wood and a century's worth of accumulated gravity came down like a judgment. The sound was overwhelming. Not a crash exactly, but something more complex. The sound of mathematics finally being solved, of weights and counterweights and stresses suddenly finding their equilibrium in a cloud of devastation. Henry's boot connected with the alley door. It burst open. Rain hit his face like a slap. His watch shop was on Maple Street, in the basement of a building that had once housed a pharmacy. Henry had bought it cheap 15 years ago when downtown Eldridge was still dying. The town had been revived since, mysteriously, rapidly, as if some force had decided that this small pocket of Iowa needed to survive. Property values had risen. Businesses had returned. The water was cleaner. The streetlights all worked. And yet, something about the revival felt wrong in a way Henry couldn't articulate. It felt synchronized. It felt like someone was taking notes. He descended into the basement at 7:30 p.m., still wet from the rain, still shaking. His workbench was exactly as he'd left it. Tools arranged in their leather rolls, a half-assembled mantel clock waiting for a new escapement mechanism, a cup of cold coffee with a skin of mold forming on its surface. Above him, the walls were lined with clocks, hundreds of them. Pocket watches, wall clocks, grandfather clocks, digital readouts, analog faces, chronographs, repeaters, and devices whose purposes he'd long since forgotten. They ticked in what should have been cacophony, but somehow achieved a kind of harmony, each one slightly out of sync with the others in a way that created a complex rhythm, like voices in a choir that never quite resolved into unison. Henry placed the silver watch under the massive magnifying lens mounted on his workbench. The green glow intensified under magnification. He used a pair of precision tweezers, surgical grade, paid for with money he'd saved watching other people's time, and found a tiny sub-dial on the watch's exterior. A dial so small it would have required a microscope to notice, let alone manipulate. He clicked it. Just a fraction of a turn. The holographic map shifted, zoomed. The image shrank down from a town-level view to a street-level view to a building-level view. The basement. His basement. His workbench appeared as a glowing blip in the projection. Henry leaned closer. The map displayed a cross-section of the town beneath the streets. Below the sewers, a network of cables labeled in glowing text, Observation Grid 4. The cables pulsed with a rhythm that matched the beating of his own heart, or maybe his own heart had matched the rhythm of the cables. He was no longer certain which had been the cause and which the effect. A blinking red icon appeared beneath his workbench. The text alongside it read, Subject, Henry Vane. Status, active. Henry's hands began to shake again. Different kind of shaking now. Not adrenaline, something colder. Something like the realization that you are a thing being observed, that your movements are being recorded, that somewhere a file exists with your name on it. He pulled open a drawer on his workbench and removed a heavy iron pipe wrench. The kind that could twist metal apart. The kind that could crack bone if swung with sufficient force. He moved to the corner of his basement floor, where a thick metal plate had been bolted down years ago. The previous owner had mentioned something about a sump pump that was no longer necessary, and Henry had never questioned it. He began to unscrew the bolts. Frantic motions, jerky, desperate. The wrench sang as he twisted each bolt free. The shadows on the basement wall stretched long and thin, like something being pulled out of shape. The metal plate lifted away. Henry shone his flashlight into the hole. Instead of dirt, instead of the absence of anything, he found a bundle of fiber optic cables pulsing with purple light. They snaked through a concrete tunnel that descended deeper than a basement had any right to descend. The cables were thick as a man's wrist, and they moved slightly, like the tentacles of some vast creature breathing far beneath the town. A low-frequency thrumming emanated from the cables. Not a sound exactly. More like a frequency that his bones could hear directly, bypassing his ears entirely. A heavy thud echoed from upstairs. The shop door. Henry's head snapped toward the ceiling. His heartbeat tripled. The shop sign outside cluttered against the window. He heard it from down here, muffled but distinct. A shadow moved past the glass. Not quick. Deliberate. Purposeful. Slow, heavy footsteps on the floorboards above. Henry burst through the back door into rain that fell so hard it seemed less like weather and more like the sky's final judgment. His boot caught the corner of a trash can, the metal lid clattering across the wet asphalt with a sound that echoed down the alleyway and seemed to announce his presence to the entire block. He scrambled to his feet, his knees scraping pavement, his breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. A figure stepped from the shadows of the brick wall across the alley. Gray suit, sharp lines. A man who looked like he'd been tailored from the same material as corporate quarterly reports and murder. In his hand, a heavy blackjack. The kind of weapon you use when you want someone to stop moving but don't necessarily care about the details of how you achieve that outcome. The man didn't say anything. He just swung. The weapon cut through the air with a whistle. Henry ducked instinctively, a movement that came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought, from the part of the brain that remembers predators. And the blackjack smashed the workbench lamp he'd been carrying. Glass exploded. Shards hung in the air for a moment like stars, then fell. Henry drove his shoulder into the man's stomach. They both slammed against the brick wall with a force that knocked the air from both their lungs. Henry heard the man grunt, a sound of pure impact, all the oxygen leaving the body at once. But the gray man recovered faster than Henry expected. A hand shot out, gripped Henry by the throat with gloved fingers, and lifted. Not all the way up, but enough. Henry's toes scraped the wet asphalt. Stars bloomed in his vision. His fingers clawed at the man's face, found flesh, and dug in deep. A line of blood traced down the man's cheek, dark in the streetlight. Henry's lungs were burning. His vision was narrowing to a tunnel. The edges of the world were turning black. His hand found the silver watch in his jacket pocket. Heavy, impossibly heavy. He gripped it and swung it like a hammer at the side of the man's head. The impact was catastrophic. Green sparks erupted on contact, a corona of light that seemed to extend beyond the normal laws of physics. The gray man's head snapped back. His grip on Henry's throat loosened. His entire body went slack, and he collapsed into a heap in the mud like a marionette with its strings cut. Henry fell forward, coughing, gasping, his throat raw, his vision still spotted with afterimages. Rain poured down his face. He looked at the gray man. The man's eyes were open but unfocused. His jaw hung loose. A thin line of blood and saliva connected his mouth to the mud. Henry looked down at the watch in his hand. The green glow had intensified. The holographic map was now pulsing red. Henry crouched behind a stone statue of a founder, some long-dead industrialist whose name he'd never bothered to learn. His hand trembled as he held the watch up, using the glass cover as a lens to peer out at the town square beyond. The watch was pulsing red, deep red, angry red. The mayor of Eldritch stood on his balcony, illuminated by harsh spotlights. Mayor Elias Thorne, 63 years old, appointed 5 years ago in an election that Henry didn't remember voting in, though his name was presumably on the ballot. The mayor wore a tailored suit, sharp as broken glass, and on his right hand, a gold signet ring that caught the light and threw it back at the watching crowd. The crowd itself, approximately 200 people, stood in perfect rows in the town square. Not rows exactly. more like they were distributed in some optimal formation calculated by someone with access to geometry and malice. The mayor raised his right hand. Perfect form, rehearsed. "Progress is a wheel," he said, his voice amplified through speakers Henry hadn't noticed before. "And we are its spokes." The crowd applauded, not randomly, not organically. 3 synchronized claps. Perfect. Exact. Henry checked his regular wristwatch. 10 p.m. Exactly. He waited. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. 60 seconds precisely. The mayor raised his right hand again. The same gesture. The same smooth, mechanical motion. "Progress is a wheel," he said, "and we are its spokes." 3 claps. In the front row, a woman in a blue dress dropped her purse at the exact same second. The clasp opened. Contents spilled onto the pavement with sounds that Henry could only imagine. He was too far away to hear them clearly, but the sequence of sounds seemed predetermined. Coins first, then a wallet, then papers. Henry's stomach turned. He looked at the watch's holographic display. The cables beneath the square were glowing in sync with the mayor's words. Purple light, pulsing in rhythm. A conductor and his orchestra. Except the orchestra had no idea it was playing the same song over and over and over. But they weren't being brainwashed. Henry knew the signs of brainwashing. His grandfather had been a musician, and Henry had read everything he could find about hypnosis and suggestion and the mechanisms by which human will could be overridden. This was different. This was worse. They were being rewound. The watch vibrated in Henry's hand. The holographic display shifted again, zooming in on the cables beneath the town, showing Henry the complexity of the network. Purple lines snaking across displays, each one pulsing in sync with some central heartbeat that Henry could feel but not see. The mayor lowered his hand. The crowd fell silent. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Just rain falling. Wind moving through the square. The distant sound of a dog barking 3 blocks away. Then, 10 p.m. again. The mayor raised his hand. "Progress is a wheel." Henry didn't wait for the rest. He crouched low and moved away from the statue, back into the shadows, back into the narrow streets of downtown Eldritch, where the street lights hummed their uncertain songs, and the gutters ran with water that looked cleaner than water should have looked. The hedge maze at Memorial Park sprawled across 3 acres. Henry had visited it once when he first moved to Eldritch. It was considered one of the town's attractions, though it was a cheerless sort of attraction, the kind designed more to disorient than to entertain. The hedges themselves were 7 feet tall, trimmed to geometric precision, the paths winding through them in a pattern that changed every season. Henry burst through the entrance at 10:30 p.m., his breath ragged, his mind fragmenting into pieces. Behind him, 3 men in gray suits. Their shoes were silent on the grass. Professional, the kind of men who knew how to move through the world without announcing themselves. One of them pulled out a stun rod that crackled with blue electricity, the color of the sky right before a thunderstorm, the color of pain made visible. Henry ran. The maze twisted around him. Right turn, left turn, straight. The fog had thickened, settling into the paths like something with intention. Visibility shrank to 10 feet, then 5. The hedges became indistinct shapes in the mist, boundaries rather than walls. Henry took a corner, hard left, putting everything he had into the movement. His boots scattered gravel. His breath came in sharp, aggressive gasps. But the hedge wall ahead slid to the left. A mechanical hiss. Steel beneath the foliage. The path that should have been open was closing, the walls sliding together like the jaws of something vast and patient. Henry's shoulder connected with the hedge. Not soft vegetation. Steel. Cold and unyielding. He bounced backward, his collarbone flaring with pain, and for a moment the shock was so complete that he couldn't move, couldn't think, could only stand there staring at the mechanical tracks visible beneath the grass, watching as the hedges locked into their new position. The footsteps behind him accelerated. An enforcer lunged through a gap, a different path, a different route. They knew the maze better than Henry did. Or maybe they could see it somehow. See the entire structure in real time. And Henry responded with pure panic and muscle memory. He swung his tool bag like a flail, the heavy metal wrenches inside connected with the man's jaw. A wet, crunching sound. The enforcer's head snapped back in a blur of motion, teeth flying white against the fog, saliva spinning through the air like something searching for a place to land. But there were two more. Henry ran deeper into the maze. Right, left, straight. The fog pressed close. The hedges seemed to be moving, shifting, rearranging themselves to prevent escape. The mechanical sounds continued, hisses, grinding, the bass rumble of hydraulics. But they were distant now. Maybe imagined. Maybe just the sound of Henry's own breathing magnified in his skull. The silver watch in his pocket was vibrating so hard, it seemed like it might tear itself free. The friction was actual, physical. Henry could feel the heat building. He reached into his pocket and pulled the watch out just as it reached some kind of critical threshold. The vibration stopped abruptly. The watch fell to the ground. Time stuttered. The rain froze midair, suspended. Individual droplets held in three-dimensional space, like some elaborate art installation. Henry could see them perfectly. See the way they refracted the streetlight that leaked through the fog. Each one a tiny prism holding the world in miniature. Then the moment cracked, and time resumed. Rain continued its fall. The footsteps behind him accelerated again. Henry grabbed the watch and threw himself forward. A closing gap in the shifting hedges. His body passed through with inches to spare, his jacket catching on a branch, tearing, the sound of rupturing seams mixing with the grinding of metal as the walls locked together behind him with a final, definitive clang. He rolled onto gravel. His knees scraped raw. He could feel the skin separating from the subcutaneous tissue, the burning bloom of road rash spreading across his lower legs. Blood. Real blood. Still red in this version of reality where things still bled red instead of blue light. He didn't look back. The town hall stood in downtown Eldritch like a judgment made of limestone and marble. Henry circled it twice, watching for movement, watching for other men in gray suits. But the streets were empty. It was 11 p.m. now, and the town had retreated into itself. Into homes and bedrooms and whatever passed for sleep in a place where people got rewound like recordings at the end of every hour. The basement entrance was locked, but the lock was old, probably from the 1930s, and Henry had spent 20 years learning how to read metal and predict its weaknesses. He had it open in 90 seconds using a tension wrench and a rake pick, fashioned from a piece of stainless steel he'd salvaged from the tower. The basement was vast. Municipal records in filing cabinets, a furnace the size of a small car, and directly beneath the center of the building, a vault. It was massive, circular, sealed with mechanisms that looked like they belonged to a different era. Gears and dials and locks that implied more than just physical security. This was security designed to keep things sealed across time. Henry held the silver watch up to the vault door's scanner. He didn't know if it would work. He didn't know what he was doing. But the watch had recognized the door. He could see it now, the way the watch's holographic display had shifted to show this exact vault, this exact mechanism. The watch projected its code. Complex geometric patterns that twisted through space like DNA molecules designed by someone who thought in dimensions Henry's brain couldn't quite process. The scanner accepted it. Lights flickered. Deep machinery whirred. The vault door shuddered and began to rotate. Not fast. Slow and deliberate, the way heavy things move when they're moving against tremendous resistance. It took 45 seconds to open fully. The chamber inside was cold. Refrigeration units hummed in the darkness, and the vault itself. The vault was lined with glass cylinders. Each cylinder contained a miniature diorama of a town resident. A frozen figure, wax-like, preserved in some kind of stasis. Henry recognized some of them: the librarian, the school principal, the grocery store manager. All of them frozen in poses of perfect normalcy. Reading a book, standing at a desk, ringing up purchases that would never complete. Henry found his own cylinder. It was at eye level. The figure inside looked exactly like him, down to the grease under the fingernails, down to the small scar on his left eyebrow where he'd cut himself on a watch spring 15 years ago. The wax figure was positioned at a workbench, tweezers in hand, working on a clock that had no face. Henry stared at himself, staring at nothing. A computer screen on a central pedestal flickered to life. CRT monitor, old enough that it hummed with the peculiar frequency of vintage electronics. Text scrolled across the green screen. Next, refresh. 01000. Below that, a file directory. Active subjects, 2,047. Deleted assets, 6,502. As Henry watched, a line of text appeared. Subject, Henry Vane. Status, transferring to deleted. His name was being moved from one column to another, in real time, typed out by some mechanism he couldn't see. A speaker in the ceiling crackled. The mayor's voice boomed down into the vault, distorted by the speakers, taking on a metallic quality that made it sound less like speech and more like a transmission from somewhere far away. "You were never meant to find the master watch, Henry," the mayor said. His voice was cold, conversational, the way someone might discuss the weather. "It's the only part of this town that exists outside the loop. Hold it when the clock strikes 12 and you'll be erased." The core of the network was directly beneath the clock tower, in a space that shouldn't have existed. Henry descended through tunnels that pulsed with purple light, following the watch's holographic map, following the way the cables seemed to pull him forward like gravity. The core was vast. A catwalk suspended over a swirling pit of purple energy that looked like it might be the color of time itself, or the absence of time, or the space where time went when it was no longer needed. Mayor Thorne stood on the catwalk. He held a heavy ornate cane with a silver head. When he saw Henry, he smiled. It was a smile without warmth, without any of the markers of human emotion. A smile that had been learned from photographs rather than practiced through actual feeling. "Henry," the mayor said, "you made it." Henry didn't respond. He moved forward, and the mayor swung the cane in a smooth, practiced motion. It connected with Henry's ribs. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Henry gasped, his body doubling over, his vision blooming with pain. But he kept moving. He lunged forward, grabbed the mayor by the waist, and they both slammed into the metal railing. The railing groaned, metal screaming under sudden stress. Henry could see it bending, deforming, beginning to fail under the force of their combined weight. Henry punched. Once. Twice. His knuckles split against the mayor's jaw. Blood, real blood, red blood, still red, spilled down the man's chin. But the mayor was strong, stronger than he should have been. He twisted his body and drove his heel into Henry's knee, a sound like machinery breaking, a sickening pop that Henry felt in places that had nothing to do with the knee itself, in chambers of his body that shouldn't have been able to register pain at all. Henry fell to one knee. The mayor raised the cane high, ready to bring it down on Henry's skull. The light from the pit turned blinding white. Henry could barely see. The world had narrowed to shadow and light and the approaching point of impact. Henry's hand found the soldering iron in his tool bag, a heavy brass tool used for melting metal, designed to get hot enough to reshape tin and copper and the world itself. He drove it into the mayor's calf. The mayor screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure pain that echoed off the pit walls and came back distorted, like a scream multiplied through infinite mirrors. His leg gave way. He staggered backward. Henry grabbed for the watch. The mayor's fingers reached for it too, a desperate motion, desperation made visible in fingertips stretched out in an arc of futile reaching. The watch emitted a shockwave. The mayor was blasted backward. His body tumbled over the railing. For a moment he hung in the air above the purple pit, a figure suspended between worlds. Then he fell. He dissolved, his body breaking down into pixels, each one spiraling into the abyss, each one contributing to the swirling vortex of purple energy that continued to pulse with its terrible heartbeat. His scream faded as he fell. Then there was only the sound of the pit itself, a thrumming, constant, eternal. Henry crawled to the main control panel. His hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, from something else, something colder and stranger. He opened the watch and tried to plug its gears into the interface. Nothing happened at first. Then the screen flickered. A file appeared. Text, numbers, dates. Creation date, 11/23:15 p.m. Cycle, 4:22. Henry stared at those numbers. They matched. They matched the current time. They matched the current cycle. They matched. He looked at his own hands. They were becoming translucent. He could see through them. The blue cables that had been beneath the town, beneath the watch, beneath reality itself, they were inside him too. He could see them moving through his palms, purple light flowing through transparent flesh. His body was becoming a conduit for something vast and incomprehensible. He put his hand on the workbench and watched as blue light leaked from a cut on his thumb. Not blood. Light. Pure, glowing light in the shape of blood. Behaving like blood. Falling like blood. But unmistakably something else entirely. The screen changed. A new file opened. Project Recursion. Henry saw a photograph. An old man. Decades old. The image was dated 1953. The man looked like him. Exactly like him. The same scar on the eyebrow. The same grease under the fingernails. The same expression of confusion and horror. Below the photograph, subject, Henry Vane, original. And below that, iteration 4052, current. Henry laughed. It came out as a sound like breaking glass. He looked down at his transparent hands, at the blue light flowing through his veins, at the evidence of his own non-existence. How many times? How many iterations? How many versions of himself had been created, had found the watch, had come to the core, had been erased? 4052. The clock began to strike. The first deep bong echoed through the core, reverberated through Henry's transparent body, turned the pit a deeper shade of purple. Henry collapsed against the control panel. In his pocket, the gold-framed photo of a woman he was supposed to have loved. The woman was fading, her face becoming a smear of unrendered pixels. The image degrading in real time, being deleted from the system like a file being emptied from a trash bin. The photo turned white, then transparent, then nothing at all. The second bong shook the walls. Henry looked around the core. The vault walls were peeling away, not deteriorating, peeling, revealing what was beneath, flickering light and television static, the digital substrate beneath the physical world. The floor beneath Henry started to dissolve, pixels separating from pixels, a void of purple electricity expanding beneath his feet. The third bong hit like a hammer. Henry curled into a ball. He gripped the watch, the only thing in the universe that was real, the only thing that existed outside the loop, the only thing that couldn't be rewound. The fourth bong was so loud that Henry's transparent ears bled light. But Henry did something then, something that came from the part of him that was still watchmaker, still craftsman, still capable of reading metal and understanding the intricate dance of gears and springs and the precise calibration of time itself. So he didn't try to stop the watch. He wound it tighter. His hands, transparent and glowing with blue light, gripped a small screwdriver. He jammed it into the main spring of the silver watch. He didn't try to stop the mechanism. He encouraged it. He twisted. He wound. The gears screamed. White sparks erupted against the blue light of his own body. The watch was overheating. The mechanism was grinding against itself. The equilibrium that had been maintained for decades, centuries maybe, Henry was no longer certain about the passage of time in a world where time was artificially maintained. That equilibrium was collapsing. Henry pulled a copper wire from the control panel and wrapped it around the watch's balance wheel. He was short-circuiting his own existence. The blue light from his body started to pour into the watch, flowing like water, accumulating in chambers that had no right to contain such energy but did anyway. The fifth bong. The sixth. The seventh. The watch began to glow. Not green anymore. White. Pure white. A light that seemed to contain all colors and no colors simultaneously. Henry's body began to dissolve, but not into deletion, into contribution. He was becoming part of the mechanism. His consciousness, his memories, his existence, all of it flowing into the watch, overclocking the network, feeding more and more power into a system designed to regulate and control rather than accelerate and destroy. The eighth bong, the ninth, the 10th. The core started to explode. Not physically, digitally. The entire construct beginning to tear itself apart as the network overclocked, as more power flowed than the system could handle, as the delicate balance between observation and reality shattered under the weight of one man's sacrifice. The 11th bong. Henry's body was almost entirely gone now. Just a silhouette of blue light. Just consciousness without form. Just will without substance. He could see the watch in his transparent hand, could see it spinning faster and faster, could feel the entire town above him beginning to collapse and reset and fragment as the network failed. The 12th bong. Everything went white. The wreckage of the clock tower lay in a heap of gray bricks and twisted metal. Dust still hung in the air, suspended by the late afternoon light, golden and forgiving. The color of 5 o'clock on an overcast Thursday. A young boy in a red hoodie wandered through the ruins, curious the way only children could be curious, fearless in the face of danger because he hadn't yet learned that danger existed in any meaningful way. His name was David, or Daniel, or something that started with D. He wouldn't remember this moment clearly for very long anyway. It would dissolve into the unreliable haze of childhood memory, becoming a dream about a tower and a watch and something that might have been real or might have been imagined. He spotted a glint of silver among the gray bricks. A pocket watch. Small, heavy, perfectly preserved despite the collapse of the structure around it. David reached down and picked it up. The watch was warm, still warm, as if it had only just been released from someone's hand. He opened it carefully, the way children often do when they've been taught to handle delicate things. The face was blank silver, polished smooth, just reflection. David looked at his own face in the polished surface. young, curious, unmarked by the traumas that would come later in life. And then he saw something else. Behind his reflection, a silhouette, the faint image of an old man, transparent, barely there, waving. The figure's mouth moved like it was saying something, but there was no sound. Just a gesture of farewell, a hand raised in goodbye, and then the silhouette dissolved into the polish. It spread out like water. It became part of the watch itself. It became nothing but reflection and silver and the endless mirroring of a boy looking at his own face. The watch made a perfect mechanical click as the cover snapped shut. David smiled. He didn't understand what he'd seen, or how he'd seen it, or whether he'd seen anything at all. It was the kind of thing that children accept without question. Magic that isn't magic, miracles that are simply part of the world's ordinary functioning. He put the watch in his pocket and walked away from the ruins. He skipped, his red hoodie bright against the drab landscape. He skipped toward downtown Eldridge, where the streets were normal and the clocks on the lampposts all read exactly the same time. All perfectly synchronized, all ticking in unison, the network still functioning, the loop still running, the observation grid still active. But something was different now. Something had changed. The clocks were still synchronized, but they were no longer forcing synchronization. The people on the streets, and there were fewer of them now. Some subjects had been deleted when the core overclocked, their cylinders shattered, their iterations terminated permanently. The people on the streets moved with the faintest hint of randomness. A woman stopped to look at a shop window, even though her schedule said she should have kept walking. A man lit a cigarette at 5:07 instead of 5:05. Small deviations, microscopic, but present. The watch in the boy's pocket remained warm.